Fans of Blind Frog Ranch watched the water close over Chad's shoulders, as if the reservoir had decided to keep him. The surface stilled too quickly, sealing the turbulence of his descent under a sheet of pewter, and for a long moment, the only sound was the thin rattle of wind across aluminum boats and coiled ropes. A camera lens hunted for bubbles. The crew's radios crackled with clipped updates, the language of professionals whose steadiness always lives one breath away from alarm. Viewers recognized that brittle calm. It's the music that plays inside the ribs when curiosity steps across the line and touches something older than it understands. This dive was supposed to be another methodical sweep, a connective stitch between earlier seasons and the unresolved questions that laced through the ranch's ponds and caverns. The plan had been mapped, rehearsed, and redundancies piled on redundancies. There were sonar passes and chalked diagrams, backup lights and tether protocols, emergency rebreathers, and a grid marked into the silt like a chessboard. Chad had run a hand along the map, memorizing the lane changes, the return points, the time to turn if readings stayed flat. The water, however, does not keep promises. It keeps secrets. From the first fin kick, viewers sensed the difference. The camera's perspective shifted from crisp visibility to a milky shiver, as though the reservoir exhaled a fine fog. Particulates glittered in the beams like drifting sparks. The depth gauge ticked down. On the surface, Dwayne's team monitored oxygen and elapsed time. They know the math of danger so well they can taste it. At home, fans performed a parallel calculus of anxious superstition. Pause the feed, rewind 5 seconds, listen for a change in the motor's tone, watch the tether for microtremors, squint at the sonar overlay for a flash that might be object or artifact or something that refuses categorization. Somewhere between pixel and perception, concern took root. Underwater, the terrain shrugged from shallow basin to a sudden lip. Silt sloped into a darker pocket, a bruise-colored well that swallowed light. Chad hovered, stabilizing his breathing, letting the plume he'd kicked settle. The plan called for a clockwise sweep along the rim, a photographic register of the rock faces, then a gentle drop into the pocket once visibility allowed. The pocket did not wait. A cold current slid up from below, thin at first, then insistently coiling around his legs like fishing line. The water temperature skidded down. His skin tingled through the suit. He tightened his posture, checked his gauges, adjusted buoyancy. The tether described a slow S-curve in the water column, ghostly and obedient, and then tugged once as the current flirted with it. The camera briefly caught a geometry that didn't look natural. It was nothing grander than a right angle where a right angle should not be. A recess formed too cleanly, a square mouth in a world of corralled ovals. Chad framed it, pulsing his light along the edges. The silt refused to drift away from that space, clinging in tense suspension the way dust hangs in a sunbeam when the room is otherwise still. Fans who freeze-frame for sport felt a collective spike of vindication and dread, a structure implied by the absence of smoothness, a line suggesting craftsmanship or catastrophe. The score in their heads shifted key. On another monitor, data scrolled with the blank patience of machines. Numbers hadn't yet learned what the water already knew. The line between exploration and intrusion is thinner underwater. Every movement feels heavy with metaphor. Chad edged closer to the square recess, careful with the fin tips, chin angled like a listener. The recess seemed to inhale the light rather than reflect it. A silver flicker crossed his beam. Maybe a fish, maybe a trick of refraction, then vanished into soft black. He extended a gloved hand and felt texture change, from sandstone sandpaper to something smoother, cooler, with a faint resonance that taxonomizes as not rock. The current strengthened, or perhaps his awareness did. He repositioned for a better angle and tapped the housing to adjust exposure. The tether hummed under a thin lateral strain. On the surface, the crew exchanged glances that looked like sentences. What no one expected was the tremor. Not a quake, not so grand, just a localized shudder, as if the water itself clenched for a second. Silt collapsed inward, eddying in a donut around the recess. The beam struck an interior edge and returned with a metallic timber. The silt clouded instantly and totally, obliterating depth perception. The camera caught nothing but the abstract ballet of particles. His breathing, steady for a professional, was a metronome in the soundscape, compressing seconds into audible counts. The tether twanged, gentle but undeniable. A whisper of negative buoyancy teased his balance. Fans at home, even the ones who roll their eyes at every rumor, felt their shoulders go tight. Concern sharpened into narrative. People began to build stories with the scraps available. The ranch's rumor myths, the region's seams of history, prior dives where compasses sulked and radios spoke to themselves, the way headlights blink in a thunderstorm before the thunder knows its own name. A dive is a place where rational checklists and primal fables are forced into the same helmet. Chad was not just a diver. He was a courier delivering human certainty into a room that preferred ambiguity. The watchers, unused to their own powerlessness, did the only thing they could do from couches and kitchen counters and late-night playbacks. They worried him upward with imagination. The silt tried to turn the world into a single color. Chad kept his hands close, minimizing disturbances, and hovered on instruments. The depth readout held steady, then twitched. The compass needle wandered like a bee. The right angle recess was gone behind opaque colloid. He redistributed weight and tested the tether's slack. A small object, no bigger than a wristwatch face, drifted through the beam, flat, irregular, with a glimpse of patterned scoring, then vanished as if embarrassed. He stabilized, logged the sighting in his mental ledger, and waited for the plume to thin. The current now had a flavor, metallic and mineral-rich. It smelled like old nails and the inside of caves. On the bank, stress made itself useful. The team traced tighter arcs around their responsibilities, refining the extraction plan by muscle memory. There is a choreography that begins whenever the human body is somewhere it was not built to be. Fans, attuned to the show's rhythms, recognize that choreography's first steps, the red checks, the double-counted seconds, the fixed stares at depth and time. Viewers who know nothing about diving know everything about dread, and dread translates across hobbies. The episode did not show panic because panic is loud. What it showed was the kind of silence that makes a person wonder how much oxygen exists, not just in tanks, but in the concept of patience. The plume relented at last, thinning from oatmeal to tea. Edges remerged. The recess remained a void, but now had a clearer border. A thin strand, filament or algae or some stubborn polymer, trailed from the recess lip, oscillating with the current. Chad traced the border with light again, mapping the seam where geology ends and intention begins. The seam seemed too straight, too crisp. A pair of parallel score lines ran off to the left and disappeared under a natural overhang. He thought of rails. He thought of sleds. He thought of the strange marriage that can occur when nature provides a stage and human hands improvise a prop. He began the slow arc that would bring him back toward the exit route, choosing prudence over conquest. Fans watched relief attempt a landing, and then swerve at the last second when the light caught the floor and revealed imprints. Not footprints, no melodrama that tidy, but depressions patterned in a way that suggested movement had repeated here. The geometry did not align with fish or stray cattle bones or the casual erosions of time. This was a floor where something had been dragged or rolled or placed and retrieved, many times, in the shape of routines. The story assembled itself from fragments: a reason for the right angle, a method for the marks, a human presence that might be centuries old or half a lifetime past. The current pulsed again, stronger, as though the pocket exhaled. The temperature dipped. A rattle answered in the housing. The tether straightened, then eased, then straightened again in algorithmic beats. On the surface, someone's hand hovered over the call to pull. The timer's whispered arithmetic. Concern reached its most articulate form, which is the realization that a person is not an avatar, but a body with lungs inside it that must go on filling. Viewers felt the boundaries of television blur, the glass between them, and this underwater room seemed thin as the film on an eye. The ranch, with its reputation for interruptions of the ordinary, leaned closer. Chad's ascent began without flourish. He followed the tether's advice, moving with economy, pausing to let the denser layers settle beneath him. The right angle recess dwindled into suggestion. The silt swarmed like startled bees and then began to forget. He glanced down once, making a mental note of a wedge-shaped protrusion near the lip, the kind of detail that becomes an anchor point in later maps and arguments. Above, the light shifted from pewter to a grayer silver, then to a color that pretends to be blue when relief wants to believe it. The soundscape widened. Motors gained texture. Radios found their consonants. On the bank, shoulders dropped in half measures. Fans let out breaths they didn't realize they'd stacked one on top of another.